Hi, everyone. Welcome, welcome. Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed guests and fellow explorers, welcome to this very special Women's History Month gathering at the Explorers Club, where we celebrate the extraordinary life and contributions of a remarkable individual, Anne Morrow Lindbergh. Today, we honor not only her accomplishments as a pioneering aviator and author, but also her profound impact on the realms of exploration, literature, and the human spirit. For those of you who may not know me, I'm Sophia Michelin, proud chair of the Breaking Barriers Committee, formed by Milbury Polk a few years ago during the 40th anniversary of Women's Explorers' inclusion as official members to the Explorers Club. It was only in 1981 that women were granted membership, and to put that into perspective, by that time, Anne Morrow Lindbergh had nearly half a century of aviation experience. Anne took to the skies herself. She became the first American woman to earn a first-class glider pilot license, together with her husband, Charles Lindbergh, and embarked on a groundbreaking journey that expanded the horizons of aviation, but Anne's contributions extended far beyond the cockpit. Anne Morrow Lindbergh was not only a skilled aviator, but also a gifted writer. Her literary works, including her famous book, Gift from the Sea, celebrates its 70th anniversary this year, reflects her deep introspection and connection to nature. North to the Orient, celebrating its 90th anniversary this year, is the account of the 1931 flight by her and her husband from the US to Japan and China by the northern route over the Arctic frontier of Canada and Alaska. It also documented their volunteering flights as relief efforts for the infamous Central China flood in 1931. You're all gifted this book tonight and signed, which by the daughter and granddaughter, which was awarded the first National Book Award of Nonfiction in 1935. As we gather to honor Anne Morrow Lindbergh, let us remember her not just as a wife of a famous aviator or a talented author, but as a trailblazer in her own right. She challenged societal norms, inspired countless individuals to pursue their passions, regardless of the obstacles they may have faced, and indeed broke barriers throughout the generations. Admittedly, I had to recruit my own mother to help me find my 6th grade paper on Anne Morrow Lindbergh. Thanks, Mom. As I presented to my class a biography of a personal hero of mine. It's surreal to be standing in front of you all, or perhaps a bit serendipitous, as part of another wonderful program highlighting the iconic Anne Morrow Lindbergh. As a member of the Explorers Club, we understand the spirit of adventure and the quest for knowledge. Anne embodied this spirit, embracing the challenges of her time with grace and courage. She navigated the turbulent waters of fame and motherhood, becoming a voice for women and a champion of the environment long before these issues gained widespread attention. Moreover, her travels and experience shaped her worldview, inspiring her advocacy for peace and understanding during a time of global conflict. She recognized the interconnectedness of humanity and the importance of protecting our planet. Her legacy reminds us that exploration is not just about discovering new places, but also about understanding and nurturing the relationships we share with each other and the natural world. Tonight, we have a wonderful full program. You'll see rare clips of Anne Morrow Lindbergh, thanks to the Smithsonian, after which you'll hear from Dorothy Cochran, a curator in the Aeronautics Department of the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum. She is responsible for the collections of general aviation aircraft and flight material, aerial cameras, and the history of women in aviation. She's also the co-author of The Aviation's Career of Igor Sikorsky, and Dorothy has written on Amelia Earhart, Anne Morrow Lindbergh, and women in aviation and general aviation. After Dorothy's presentation, our own B.B. Conrad will moderate a fireside chat with Anne's daughter, Reeve Lindbergh, and granddaughter, Christina Lindbergh, along with Dorothy. And at the end of the presentations, we will have a Q&A. And just a little bit of housekeeping to remind everyone, please silence your phones if you haven't already done so. So in the spirit of exploration, let us delve into discussions that reflect Anne Morrow Lindbergh's values and ideals. As we embark in this journey together, let us celebrate Anne Morrow Lindbergh's legacy, drawing inspiration from her courage, creativity, and unwavering commitment to exploration in all its form. Thank you for joining us today to honor a true pioneer and an indomitable spirit. Let us now begin our exploration of her remarkable life and the lessons it continues to impart. Thank you.
What kind of a plane was it in which you learned how to fly?
I learned to fly in a bird plane, and it was a small plane, a biplane. And I remember my husband saying, he bought this plane, which we afterwards got rid of. He said, I think you might as well learn to fly in this plane because I think it could land in a tree.
Being the pupil of the world's most famous pilot only strengthened Anne Lindbergh's desire to be a first-rate aviator herself.
I wanted terribly to live up to my husband's expectations. We were flying on Long Island from a small club, not very elegant, but it had a nice field, and I made flight after flight after flight, takeoffs and landings. And my landings were pretty bumpy. And I was always so grateful when I got down on the grass. And he said, you have to go round and round again until you make a good landing. And sometimes it was quite late in the evening before I made that landing.
Where did you go on your first solo flight?
The first flight that I remember was flying from the Aviation Country Club, and I flew over Manhattan and landed at Newark Airport. And I felt like a queen.
Lindbergh was hired to lay out the first commercial air routes between California and New York. Anne joined him, not as a passenger, but as co-pilot and navigator.
This was a period of long-distance flights to prove that the airplane could really transport people practically. Our first flights were over the United States to pick out the best fields. And I can remember there was a wonderful field in Wichita, which was all grass, just all grass. And my feeling was, I thought, well, if my husband becomes incapacitated in the plane, I would just set out for Wichita.
Flying with her husband cast a kind of golden bloom over everything, she once said. Maybe it's just the way we feel, Charles and I, when we're off together all alone. All gold. Lindbergh equipped the Sirius with an engine powerful enough for long-distance flights, and together the Lindberghs flew from California to New York in 14 hours and 45 minutes, breaking the speed record by more than 3 hours. But with gas fumes leaking into the cockpit, Anne Lindbergh, pregnant with their first child, fought nausea and fatigue.
I was about to have a baby, and I was just terribly seasick. But I knew I couldn't complain because that would spoil the record. And it would also prove I was a weak woman, which I didn't want either. So we got there. It was all right.
The following year, the couple took on a new challenge, to chart an air route to the Orient for Pan American Airways. Their route would be a great circle, an arc that would take them north over territory no plane had ever flown before. Most of the flight would be over water, so the Sirius was outfitted with oversized pontoons. The Morrow family's summer home in North Haven, Maine was the jumping-off point.
We never knew when we started out just where you were going to land. The pilot and the plane had to be completely self-sufficient. You were not guided in. We did have radio, but nobody could help you. You were counting on nobody but yourselves, and you had, therefore, complete emergency equipment.
Was weight among your foremost concerns?
Weight was the thing. You only could take the necessities.
How much did you weigh?
I think I weighed perhaps 105 pounds.
Your husband got quite a bargain for 105 pounds.
He got quite a bargain.
Radio operator, co-pilot, navigator, photographer?
I was passionately interested, of course, in my communication with the radio operators. I was on my mettle to be an efficient radio operator. I never was as good as the professional ones, but I felt I did my job on that plane, and that I was necessary, and that was a great help to my confidence, because I had really never done anything technical before.
Their first stop was Ottawa, Canada, where the Lindberghs were warned that the course they had chosen, across the Northwest Territories, Alaska, and over the Bering Straits to Siberia and the Orient, was too dangerous. In her classic account of their trip north to the Orient, Anne Lindbergh recalls a Canadian aviator pointing to their maps and shaking his head. "I wouldn't take my wife over that territory," he said. "But you must remember," Lindbergh replied, smiling at Mrs. Lindbergh, "that she is crew." By the time they reached Alaska, Anne Lindbergh had become an experienced navigator and radio operator, able to decipher the faintest transmissions of Morse code. Next stop, Japan. But not before a harrowing flight through dense fog forced them to an emergency landing in choppy waters off the coast. The cheering crowds that greeted them in Tokyo were familiar to Charles. But now they were cheering two Lindberghs. The subtleties of Japanese culture enchanted Mrs. Lindbergh. Their stay in Japan was a tranquil contrast to the drama of their final stop, China. As she recounted it north to the Orient, only someone who has been there can imagine the amount of damage a flood can do. The Yangtze River had overflown its banks, leaving thousands homeless and destitute. To those directing relief efforts, the arrival of the Lindberghs was heaven sent. Their plane was the only aircraft in China with enough range to survey the flood's outer limits. With the British aircraft carrier Hermes as their base, they mapped the flood and flew in medicine and doctors. But their historic flight came to an end when the plane that had carried them from Maine to Hankow was damaged while being lowered into the Yangtze, the Lindberghs leaping to safety. They had to go home by ship, but by flying 10,000 miles in 2 months, the Lindberghs opened a new path to the Orient for commercial. Lindberghs set off on the last of their great survey flights. They would search for seaplane routes across the Arctic and the North and South Atlantic. This trip would be 3 times longer than the last. The Sirius was rebuilt with a bigger and more powerful engine. The commercial aircraft that would use the new routes could not carry enough gasoline to leap the Atlantic as Charles Lindbergh had done. So the couple had to find refueling stops, flying along the coasts of some of the most desolate places in the world, including the Greenland ice cap.
This was a huge continent of ice, like a great big white bowl, and you were ants crawling over it. It was enormous. There was always a kind of mist over it. So it was very hard to see any direction or tell what was snow and what was mist. It was also very cold. And every once in a while, my husband would pass me a note and say, every 5 minutes we are saving a day's walk, which was very comforting to me.
What they needed most, a chance to be alone and anonymous, Greenland was able to supply. They fell in love with it.
It was partly the really great beauty of the scenery and the vividness of the inhabitants, both the Eskimos and the Danes. We stayed quite a while in Greenland.
It was in Greenland that the plane got its name.
Yes, he took one of the technical men on a flight and up the coast of Greenland, and I was left behind. And when the plane came back to the harbor, all the children ran out and pointed up and said, "Ting Misartok, Ting Misartok." So we asked, and Ting Misartok meant the one who flies like a big bird. So that's how it got the name.
After Greenland, they crisscrossed the northern continent of Europe, but they couldn't fly back the way they had come. The route was frozen over. They flew to the Azores, then to the coast of West Africa, and prepared to cross the Atlantic Ocean to South America, choosing the shortest route possible between the two continents. Loaded with gasoline and supplies, the Ting Misartok refused to take off. Lindbergh lightened it by casting off tools, food, their reserve supply of gas, even his razor. Finally, the Ting Misartok was light enough to struggle free of its watery runway and the plane was airborne. During the 16 hours of the flight, Anne Lindbergh established a record number of radio transmissions before the pontoons of the Tingma-Sartok touched water at Natal, Brazil. The Lindberghs had joined together the continents of the world for commercial aviation. From the South American continent, they hopscotched their way up to the Caribbean, to another hero's welcome in the United States. In 5 months, they had logged an astonishing 30,000 miles. They had traveled faster and farther than any other explorers in history. The world has never forgotten the achievements of Charles Lindbergh, but another pioneer aviator, Amelia Earhart, said there was no one quite like Anne Morrow Lindbergh. Earhart wrote, "Under her gentleness lies a fine courage to meet both physical and spiritual hazards with understanding."
Well, good evening, everyone. This is going to be a hard act to follow, I think. But I'm delighted to be here. Yes, I am Dorothy Cochran, curator, one of the curators at the National Air and Space Museum, and it's my honor to be here. I want to thank everyone here at the club for the invitation, and all the members of the Lindbergh family, the Morrow family, and all the other Lindbergh associated families that may be here, and friends, supporters of them over the years. You know, we're here to celebrate the life of a pioneering author and explorer, Anne Morrow Lindbergh. And I will say it's been nearly 40 years since my first visit here, back in July of 1986, when a UPI press article noted, "With a splash of Moet champagne at a ceremony at the exclusive Explorers Club, Wednesday, millionaire Malcolm Forbes christened a space-age balloon explorers said could be the first to fly around the world." Well, unfortunately, that did not work out for that particular balloonist and design, but I was in great company then, and I'm very happy to be back and be in the company of everyone here now. So, as noted, in 2025, we're marking the 90th anniversary of the publication of Anne's book, North to the Orient. And though not surprising to those of us who have read the book, it really is a remarkable publishing feat that it has remained in print ever since. And this evening, I'm delighted to share some of the backstories of the flights that inspired both this amazing book and its follow-on, Listen the Wind. In doing so, I hope to also confirm Anne's well-deserved honor and inclusion here at the Explorers Club and in aviation history. So, let's see. On May 27th, 1929, Anne Spencer Morrow, a shy young woman, a graduate of Smith College, and a promising writer, married Charles A. Lindbergh, the most famous aviator of the time. Not surprisingly, this radically changed her life. Charles Lindbergh was the iconic superstar, the first person to fly solo and nonstop from New York to Paris in 1927. In time, however, Anne would emerge as a surprising success story. By 1934, she was referred to as the First Lady of Aviation on her own merits. The transformation from a young woman with a crush on the world's first media star to a decorated flight crew member and acclaimed author became a springboard for her extended writing career. And for the public, this evolution initially resulted in a confident writer who provided luminous literary glimpses of 1930s aviation. Her two books, brimming with flying experience during what is generally often called the golden age of flight, were bestsellers, as we spoke of earlier. For the National Air and Space Museum, their Lockheed Tingma-Sartok is a complex aircraft of change, harboring stories of public and personal exploration that will soon be displayed again with quotes and clothing and supplies in the museum's Baron Hilton Pioneers of Flight Gallery down in Washington, D.C. at the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum. For Anne, this was a deep immersion into Charles's world of flight, but one that she made her own through her flight training, including acquiring her glider, private pilot, and radio licenses, to learning Morse code and celestial navigation, to carefully performing her complex duties, to documenting it all in her radio logs and diaries for future use. Anne first met and flew with Charles in December 1927 when her father, Dwight Morrow, then ambassador to Mexico, invited Charles to stop in Mexico City during his goodwill tour of Central and South America in the fall of 1928, or in December of 1927. In the fall of 1928, Anne and Charles began a courtship in the air, starting immediately as in our first date and doing the fundamentals of flight, on their very first date in an airplane. From then on, she took the controls of the wide variety of planes that he flew around the country for business and private use. In the summer of 1929, they embarked on a cross-country flight from Roosevelt Field to Los Angeles in a Curtiss Falcon, stopping at the depots and airports for the new transcontinental air transport rail air coast-to-coast passenger service, for which Charles was a technical advisor. En route back east, they became aerial archaeologists. You'll see up on the screen here, they're using a Graflex RB Series C camera to take the first known aerial photographs of Arizona's Canyon de Chelly and New Mexico's Chaco Canyon and Pecos area. And these are still valuable photos used today in mapping and other scientific experiments or exhibitions around the area. They took turns flying and shooting more than 100 photographs of ancestral plebeian ruins and another 100 in the Four Corners area, Utah, Arizona, New Mexico, and Colorado. And they also spied the remains of cliff dwellings hidden near the tops of a canyon and unseen by the archaeologists themselves below. Then on October 7th, 1929, and fresh off the inaugural commercial Caribbean flights with Charles and Pan American President Juan Trippe, Anne gazed out the window of a Sikorsky S-38 flying boat, entranced by the view before her. These gleaming stone structures only recently freed from the thick tropical vegetation of the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico. It was Chichen Itza, a remnant of the Mayan civilization that thrived there between 750 and 1200 AD. Shortly thereafter, the Geographic Review of April 1930 published an archaeological reconnaissance in the air in Central America by Oliver Ricketson and A.V. Kidder, with photographs by Mrs. Lindbergh and Oliver Ricketson, Jr. Ricketson noted, Mrs. Lindbergh sighted an eminence on the western horizon, and we turned at right angles to a course to examine it. It turned out to be a steep, high mound set slightly back from the tip of an inconsiderable natural elevation. The stonework of a ruined temple could be made out, and nearer to the end of the ridge were 2 or 3 more lesser mounds, looking like this. Overall, most of their images are usually credited to both of them, and you can sometimes figure out maybe from where they were seated what the view is of the actual the focus of the photograph itself, so whether it's over a wing or in back of the wing. But in this particular instance, she got credit for the photographs in that article, and so that really brought her along as an aerial archaeologist with Charles. The Graflex camera is now displayed in the aerial photography subunit of the Thomas W. Haas We All Fly Gallery at the museum. And on the museum's website, you can find my blog on this pioneering aerial archaeology that they did. In January 1930, the Lindberghs were in California awaiting their plane that would take them to remote lands around in search of air routes. In the meantime, they decided to try out gliding near San Diego with Holly Bolus here and his gliders. And by early February, Anne had received a first-class glider pilot license, the first American woman to do so. Soaring down Soledad Mountain to the Pacific coastline was a quiet but stunning adventure. Then, in anticipation of their flying future, student pilot Anne began serious flight training with Charles. He bought the Brunner Winkelbird BK trainer aircraft in 1930 and titled it in her name. Then she wrote in her diary, as you saw in the video before, "Charles has been working me very hard this last week, flying every day out of the Aviation Country Club." Later, when writing the foreword to Hour of Gold, Hour of Lead, she noted, "There is almost no mention of the hours of flying instruction given me by my husband in a bird airplane. Even had I described it at the time, I would not have admitted how challenged, frightened, and infuriated I was, trying to satisfy my exacting instructor." It's maybe not always a good idea to have a wife and husband as student and instructor. "I remember going round and round the field alone in that plane, making one hideously bumpy landing after another. And then, after all that hard work, there is no description of the absolute exultation of my first solo flight away from the airport, from Long Island Aviation Country Club over the towers of New York to Newark Airport. My dream as a young girl at last came true." Anne completed her Department of Commerce flight test on May 29, 1931, in another aircraft. She soon sold the bird, and a succession of pilots flew it off and on until 2022. However, it is now displayed at the Air and Space Museum's Udvar-Hazy Center near Dulles Airport in Chantilly, Virginia. I will say that this was one of my goals before I retired, to get this airplane into the collection, and I'm very, very pleased that I was able to do so. So you can come and see it there sometime. Charles and Anne set a U.S. continental record in their Lockheed Sirius, as she mentioned in the video, and oh, by the way, she was about 7 months pregnant. Then, with a change to pontoons, they made the 2 global survey flights exploring possible overseas airline routes during the pioneering days of international air travel. So here are maps that were drawn by a former curator in the department, and then that's the famous line there that she mentioned in the video, or that McCulloch mentioned in the video. But you can see it's kind of, the first one is the Great Circle view, and then the flatter view from the North Pole, which is in the center of that lower one. So it gives you an idea of how far they went and how far high up they were in the North American, gliding along the edge of the Arctic Circle, and then down through Alaska and down over through Russia, or Soviet Union, I guess at that time, and then to Japan and into China. And then there's some pictures of them along the way. There she was at Point Barrow, Alaska, and then this picture below is when they had landed in Japan. And then this is the other route in 1933. In 1933, they embarked on an easterly survey flight to Europe. 5 months, 10 days, 30,000 miles, 4 continents, and 21 countries later, they were home for Christmas with their second son, John. Besides the official survey work, the 2 flights offered relief from the endless public scrutiny that had followed Charles since 1927, and were perhaps some of the happiest days of their marriage. First, let's look inside. Well, here's a picture, them taking off, as mentioned, from Maine, and then getting the actual painting of the name of the aircraft when it got to Greenland. Leah, let's see, I have his name here, let me find it. In the back cockpit, well, first let's look inside the plane, then I'll get to his name. This is what the plane looked like in a plan view. And you could see the front cockpit and where Charles would be right in the middle of the plane there, and then she's in the back cockpit there. And around her, she's got all the radio equipment. She's got the antenna that she reels in and out that helps her get to actually be able to do these communications and actually set the records that she did because she was able to keep up. She had a very good antenna that helped bring in all the different cycles and kilocycles of the frequencies that she needed to use. And then she also had her stick in the middle, and she could remove that stick and then use the radio equipment far better. But you can see that it's kind of an intricate plane. And then in front of that, in front of their two cockpits, up in the front is where they slept at night. Basically layering things over the floorboards, and then all of their supplies underneath there, and then they slept on top of them. And so it was quite a detailed aircraft. And then this is her equipment, her telegraph key, her headphones, her transmitter and receiver, and then the cockpit showing where she keeps her control stick, and the control stick's out up there, plus her license. So in her back cockpit, Anne removed the control stick she used for flying from its socket for easy access to the sending key, the radio coils, they're shown here, the transmitter receiver. What exactly did she do? Well, she quickly moved from recognizing only individual letters in code to full full words, and maintained a continuous radio schedule of weather, position, and arrival and departure information. Her radio logs are extensive, and they are records of the flight, her one-way or two-way communications all day and sometimes into the night. The ability and quality of her work is still underappreciated. Her radio logs, diaries, and photography all contributed valuable observations of geography, weather, and detailed practical aspects for Charles's final report to Pan American Airways on which routes, which areas, which landing points would be the most suitable for the flights. And of course, we heard earlier about the remark that she is crew. This was the developmental days of aerial radio and navigation equipment, and they proved how new technology could be used along the edges of the northern and southern hemispheres. Their success with the Weems navigation and Pan American radios proved methods and equipment soon to be utilized by transoceanic airlines and private pilots. And to put it in real perspective, just 4 years later, in 1937, if either Amelia Earhart or Fred Noonan had had Anne's radio telegraph capabilities, they would have most likely completed their world flight. Oops, went too far. Professional recognition followed the 1933 flight. She won the U.S. Flag Association Cross of Honor. She became the first woman to receive National Geographic's Hubble Gold Medal, and only the 10th person to be awarded it. And in 1934, the National Aeronautic Association awarded Anne an honorary membership, only the third woman there, and she won the Harmon National Trophy for an American woman. She became the first woman to awarded the gold medal from the Veteran Wireless Operators Association for setting a long-distance record of 3,000 miles for wireless communication in code. Suffrage leader Carrie Chapman named Anne one of the 10 outstanding women of 1935, along with Amelia Earhart and Eleanor Roosevelt. She was sometimes too humble about her achievements, certainly in public, but though she felt a natural reticence to publicity, and she embraced her competence and honor in private, there was a satisfaction for taking a practical part in the work of the expedition as radio operator and co-pilot, she said, and co-navigator. I was no longer a page as I had romantically pictured myself just after our marriage. I was a crew member on an extraordinarily difficult survey mission. I was amused but inordinately proud to hear about the comment of a Pan American radio operator who, after sending me a 150-word message in code through heavy static, made the astonished remark, "My God, she got it." So what came from her flying experience? At the time, At the time, ordinary women were not thought to be predisposed to aviation, to learn to fly, and certainly not to be fully vested crew members. So she helped to change that by illustrating that the casual interest or the implanted interest could be embraced, mastered, and then comfortably discarded. While we honor those to whom aviation was their true calling, what's interesting is to find those women and men who engaged and made flying more accessible, not only the realm of the enlightened. It helped bring aviation to people and to everyday life as simple transportation, useful to the common man or woman. Her true legacy, despite the romance and hard work of it all, was helping flight become practical transportation and an emerging global technology. And this transition is important. She's not Amelia Earhart carving out a career in aviation. She was drafted by her husband, but she took the challenge and becoming a true partner and crew member, and then used her innate calling for the written word to share exploration by air of the 1930s. So when they finally returned from the 31 flight, she began to write, and then following the horrific kidnapping and murder of their son, Charles Jr. in 1932, writing became an escape from the depression that enveloped her. And after the 1933 mission, Anne authorized Lindbergh lawyer Henry Breckenridge to test the waters for a book on either flight. By June 1934, she had finished the first draft of the 1931 survey book, referring to it now as a book with one chapter, and then she also wrote about their 33 survey flight. And for both projects, she drew on her extensive diaries, radio logs, and her keen observation of people and cultures along the way. So in September 1934, National Geographic magazine, a natural fit, obviously, for the content, published Anne's Flying Around the World, the North Atlantic, to wide praise. The New York Times reviewer found the journey and the 75-page article fast-paced, but full of personality and insight. And he got the point of the trip and the article, preparing the public for the coming of commercial transatlantic air travel. Everyone knew that Charles could fly. Now they learned that Anne could fly and professionally operate a radio. The Associated Press noted that Anne, temporarily turned author, little did they know, managed to humanize her famous husband. And by letting the public in on tense moments and jokes between the two of them, Anne brought to their 5-month flight the familiar banter of any traveling couple. This departure from their usual stonewalling of the press offered accessibility on their own terms. And you can see her, this is some of her handwriting here, and some in some of her notes, at some times she pressed in these pieces of branches and flowers and things that she had picked up along the way. So you can see that she's written in the upper left up there, he's wanting to know when they're going to get, she wants to know when they're going to get there, and he writes that they're going to get there soon, and they talk about the degrees, they talk about the weather, they talk about various things, and, you know, give each other little hints of joy and interest in what they're doing at that point in time. So it's a lot of fun to read the actual written words on them. And particularly, let's see, the Associated, no, I read that. Anne particularly enjoyed writing about the 3-week Greenland survey, where young Levi Amaka painted onto the plane the name of the locals called it the Tingmissartoq. And then Greenlanders remember them still as well. In 2021, to coincide with the Lindbergh Gallery opening at the Qaqortoq Museum in the town now known as Julianhab in southern Greenland, the director of that museum contributed to a blog I wrote about their explorations up there in Greenland. And that you can also find that on our website as well. Book publishers immediately responded to the geographic article, and she chose Harcourt Brace. And the publisher said once he started reading her manuscript, he just couldn't put it down. And so she's just said, she gushed, "There is a place for me. There is some reason for my living." She was so proud that her book was going to be published. Published on August 15th, North to the Orient became the nonfiction bestseller of 1935. And at a minimum, it reflected the nascent aerial exploration going on and also the early joys of their marriage. It was inquisitive and buoyant as they skimmed at low altitudes over the upper rim of North America and Asia. And she explained her overall purpose in the preface. What is the essential quality that has come out in the telling? It is not the flying alone, nor in the places alone, nor alone in time, but in a peculiar blending of all three. It was not that we arrived in Baker Lake on August 3rd by plane, but that 3 hours of flying had brought us from the modern port of Churchill to a place where no white woman had ever been before. It was not only that we flew from Baker Lake to Aklavik in 12 hours by the midnight sun, but that while flying over those gray wastes of southern Victoria land, isolated and wild, I could hear through my earphones the noisy chatter of big cities over the edge of the world. So it was heralded, as Sinclair Lewis called it, North to the Orient, one of the most beautiful and great-hearted books that has ever been written. And such praise for her writing totally eclipsed. There were some pre-publication rumors that maybe her book would be ghost-written. Obviously not. Inspired, she quickly moved on to her new project, poring over the 1933 diaries and plotting those chapters. The two of them had preferred the exploration and isolation of the North Atlantic to the crush of Europe, but she soon pivoted, focusing solely on the problematic South Atlantic departure from Africa. Listen, the Wind was published in 1938, October, and Catherine Woods of the New York Times said, "What people should be told at once, perhaps, is that the book has a pregnant, almost cosmic quality. Within 10 days, within a few pages, it holds a full adventure of pioneer flying, and it also holds a full measure of human life." And then we move on to Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. In July 1939, a French publisher asked de Saint-Exupéry, the former Aéropostale airmail pilot, intellectual, and celebrated author of Southern Mail and Night Flight, to write a preface for the French edition of Listen the Wind. And he found the book a myth about aviation and stated he wanted to write a longer piece. So he noted the dilemma of trying to get home. Again, making sacrifices all around. As the Lindberghs flew down the coast of Africa searching for the final jumping off point for home, problems escalated. Where and how would they get the heavily laden plane into the air? He picked up on her melancholy. "I feel there is running through these pages a very slight anxiety which takes different forms, but flows continuously like a silent blood stream. What Anne Lindbergh has expressed, to put it in a nutshell, is the bad conscience one feels in having a taste for being late. Everything is on the verge of stopping. How well Anne Lindbergh secretly underpins her tale with something that defies definition, something as elemental and universal as a myth. She does not write about the plane, but through her experiences of the plane." And after finishing this extended preface, he boarded a French liner for a transatlantic crossing to New York City, where 3 days later, he received a call from Anne inviting him to their rented house at Lloyd Neck, Long Island. It became an intellectual affair for Anne. And all this time, we are talking at top speed with a kind of intensity that precluded any attention to practical details. He is talking about my book and pulls out the preface of pulls it out of his pocket. I am distracted trying to talk in French. "Perhaps you do not like the preface." "Oh, yes, yes." Years later, I found the preface intensely beautiful and was moved not only with the importance he attached to the book, but of his analysis of it. And I'm also startled by what he has seen of me. Stacy Schiff wrote in her biography of Saint-Exupéry, between Manhattan and Long Neck, they had covered North America, aviation, art, the desert, exile, poetry, Alfred North Whitehead, lost all track of their surroundings, and began to finish each other's sentences. These two authors wrote nearly all of the most lyrical accounts we have of flight. And then in August of 1947, she flew to Europe to write about a post-war scene. In Airliner to Europe, Notes from a Passenger's Diary, Anne could have been writing about a more recent flight, lamenting, "The little round peephole of a window from which to look at the sky, the whole sky. Flying has shut out the sky." She preferred the view and atmosphere of her earlier cockpits. She missed the smell of the earth when flying just a few hundred feet over the earth and the metallic chatter of the Morse code from the telegraph key. And then published in 1944, The Steep Ascent was her third flight book based on a 1937 flight in their small Mohawk airplane over the Alps to India. That lightly veiled fiction had a spiritual tone of a woman's story, the story of a woman's life and ordeal. And it kind of marked the end of the pioneering and business flights with Charles and the beginning of her soul-searching that signaled a new phase in her writing career. So what came from her aviation writing? Beyond the aviation and exploration accolades were her publications, stunning prose of detailed observation and analysis of aviation, people, places, and their own lives. Anne did not seek her own career in aviation, and her solo flights were few and far between. Instead, she flew with Charles and offered humanistic analysis of the impact of aviation, along with its spectacle and frightening moments. Her aviation years were ultimately fleeting, but they spawned her far more enduring success as a writer. She flourished, albeit with some missteps, as a best-selling author, sought after by literary, popular, and women's magazines, and produced introspective and influential works on women, love, and marriage. Much later, rather than writing an autobiography, she published 6 edited and extraordinary diaries. Anne Lindbergh's impact as both a pilot, explorer, and as a writer existed along others. Amelia Earhart wrote narratives of her flights and articles promoting women in aviation, as did other women pilots. The 1930s saw an array of women pilots, from the progressive Virginia Woolf's eclectic and innovative prose to the conservative prose of Claire Booth Luce as editor of Vanity Fair, just to name a few. Her literary legacy moves from an aviation narrative of deep lyrical quality to articles of war, peace, and controversy, to groundbreaking introspective and timely books on the changing lives of women. Gift of the Sea, the bestseller of 1955, marked her recovery from depression and explored her growing independence, and is considered a leading edge of mid-20th century feminist literature. But North to the Orient and Listen to the Wind allowed her to find her way there. So I just wanted to show then a final overview of a wrap-up here of her timeline of her aviation exploits and accolades. And you can see that they are daunting, they are numerous, and they are detailed and very, very important, and speak to the aviation of that time frame and what it took to do these flights, to be a member, a fully vested flight crew member, and then thankfully receiving the accolades that she deserved for them. So you can see a whole bunch of them there, variety of different, the thing that stands out, of course, is that she was either the first or the third or whatever woman to actually get some of these awards, because so few women were flying at the time or were recognized. And then this is something that I was sitting there watching TV one night, and here's what showed up on TV, on Jeopardy. So she is still thought of. I don't know, is that a dubious honor or what? I'm not sure. And I think the person, it was Final Jeopardy, and I believe they got the answer right. So thank you so much. In closing, I just want to thank you for your attention this evening, and I was thrilled to receive this invitation to help celebrate Anne Morrow Lindbergh's inclusion at the Explorers Club. And I want to thank everyone for inviting me here, the family, and just being part of the entire scene. And I'm so delighted to have Anne be celebrated here at the club. So thank you very much. Oh, it's water. Okay. I've got two. Well, we might need them.
We are now, ladies and gentlemen, moving into the fireside chat portion of this evening's event. And I just wanted to thank Dorothy for your extraordinary overview of Anne's accomplishments as a pioneer aviator. I'm sure you were all taken with a photograph of the tiny bird BBK in the shadow of the Air France Concorde. And that's where we've come from. That's what she started. In any event, we are very fortunate to have family members, Anne's daughter and granddaughter, Reeve and Christina Lindbergh, with us tonight. And they will share their unique family perspective on her accomplishments. I will begin with a question that I've always had. I wondered how a shy English major from Smith can navigate the transition to someone who steps into an open cockpit and masters the skills to navigate the globe. And I will say that very often they say it is the times that make the man, or I should say the woman. But in the space program, I would ask, did she inherently have the right stuff? Or did all these accomplishments come about through just putting her nose to the grind and soldiering on? What do you feel as a family?
A little of each, I would say.
I'm sorry, we have
sorry.
to share the microphone.
Is it on?
I have no idea.
Oh,
Yes. Okay. I
good?
think she had much more.
We're all going to sit together. So.
Okay. I think she had much more of the inherent intelligence and ability to adapt and to learn than she ever gave herself credit for. And I also think she would say, people would ask her, how did you do this? And she'd say, oh, well, I was in love. And I thought, that's not it. She had a wonderfully open spirit. And when it came, this opportunity came with her in the person of my father, she took to the air. So she had both of the things you were talking about, and she was a great surprise to herself and to the world, I think. So.
And Dorothy, you mentioned the same thing that I think Reeve said, that this was sort of an unexpected success. And it's that theme that really plays out. Any thoughts on this particular two things can be true at once? You know, she was inherently highly competent, but also it took a great deal of perseverance and study. Any other thoughts on that? Here we go.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Reeve, but I think the aviation explosion when she was in college, I mean, it was just electrifying everybody. And didn't she take flying lessons all on her own before she had met?
she took some
grandfather?
flights. Yeah.
So she
got in trouble for that too at Smith College.
I think so. But I think she was so excited about it. Now, I don't know if she knew she was going to meet him.
I think she took those flights after she had first met him.
Is that right?
But before before he came and took
Okay.
her and took her on their first date.
Well, she was thrilled by the flight she took with him, and I think also thrilled by him. So love helps, I think. Yeah.
We all know love helps. Then I think, interestingly, Anne would be an inspiration to young women today, and the whole theme of STEM education and girls who code, because she actually had to learn the Morse code. And I think many of us forget that it was English majors and women who were hired to work at Bletchley in England in World War II to crack the Enigma code. It was women who were educated at the Seven Sisters in the United States who were the first programmers for the ENIAC computer in Pennsylvania. So they knew how to translate English language into mathematics. So I have always been curious. There's a radio room here at the Explorers Club. I've always said to my husband, who's a member, can I see that radio room? What goes on there? For both family members, what did it take to learn the skills to work with radio? Was she tutored? Can you give us some insights on that, Christina?
I don't know, except I think when they started planning these trips, grandfather felt she needed to learn those, and boy, she just knuckled down and did it, yeah.
She was an excellent student, and she knew how to study, and she learned from a number of different people, but boy, she was reading those books and teaching herself because she had to.
Yeah, and they were both tutored as well, doing it, and because he had learned earlier, and when the tutor came to teach the both of them, refresh him, and start her on her business, the tutor said that he had forgotten most of what he had been taught a few years earlier, but he picked it up again. But you know, she did so well that when she got her radio license, her scores were only like 1 or 2% less than his, and they were both well up in the 90s. So, you know, she took to it. She was able, you know, and she took it, you know, as just a great challenge. And she had, you know, she was daunted at first, but then she had fun with it.
Well, Anne Morrow Lindbergh was clearly more than crew. And I think in addition to being a radio operator, she was an aerial photographer. And I think this brings us into the aspect of her talents as an early environmentalist. Because I was speaking with two of the gentlemen who were here from the foundation this evening, and as she took aerial photographs over Greenland and other remote areas at that time, she was able to record the difference in population or the changing shoreline, and this really precipitated the kind of data collection that initiated an environmental awareness. So we're talking about a talent before Rachel Carson. So again, the subject of this evening for young women explorers, for current explorers, is not just about a woman, but with the range of talent. Let's focus a little bit on the area of the environment.
Well, I think that my grandparents' perspective from the air on what the country looked like, especially the U.S., as they were making their transcontinental flights, and how it changed with the advancement of technology, and how bulldozers or huge land-moving equipment were altering the course of rivers and the whole terrain, and I think they were both just shocked by and concerned about, you know, the effects on wildlife, the effects on soil quality, all those things. And they were, I think, because they could see it. I mean, and also treasured wilderness from the beginning, and the, you know, the connections of all forms of life and how important all that was. And I think they perceived that very early on, and grandfather, I think, became quite disillusioned with the effect of, you know, all the mining, chainsaws, bulldozers, you know, all that you know, was huge progress in those days. So, you know, I think they both devoted, you know, the second halves of their lives to trying to bring people's attention to the fact that we needed to be aware of it and do what we could. I don't know how much people paid attention, but
After a while, yeah. And Christina's brother Eric is the head of the Lindbergh Foundation, which works with balance between technology and wilderness, among other things. And my father did write again and again. He wrote, I'm afraid and worried that the technology I loved, I've always loved, is destroying qualities of greater worth. And they of course were they were partners in writing. They didn't write anything, neither one of them anything of each other's, but they would really sit together and go over each other's manuscripts. And she was an English major, you know, she would correct points of grammar and this and that, and say, well, you know, you could use this word or that word, and he would correct things like, she would talk about the clouds, and he'd say, well, actually, no, what that is, that's a, you know, cumulonimbus, and she'd say, oh, so he told her the kinds of things that he knew about, but they both were very much involved. I think as a result of these flights together, they're very much involved in what was happening to the environment. And if you read this book, you realize that they're reading the landscape below them. They're reading the rivers and they're reading the mountains, and they have so much greater sense of what the earth is like, what the view from the air really is. And as Christina said, that change was extraordinary and very, very depressing, difficult for them. And they turned their minds toward preservation.
They brought our attention to very topical Greenland. Forgive that interjection. I think I wanted to add, because this portion is about the family, we have another very special family member here, which is Anne Morrow Lindbergh's niece. And sitting in the front row, would you stand for a moment? This is Margaret Lundberg Lindbergh. And she was instrumental in organizing this evening with a series of events and teas with former President Fania Rose. What in particular that Aluna had brought to my attention is she fondly reminded me of Mike Collins, the Apollo astronaut. And what he said that resonated with her is that it's not just about getting there, but it's about the story. Communication is critical in so many aspects, whether you're an explorer, whether you work on Wall Street, whether you're an environmentalist. And my question for Reeve and Christina is that writing skill which both of you have in spades? You're both published, very highly recognized. Is that particular skill a Lindbergh woman's gene?
Oh, I have no idea how to answer that.
I hope so.
I hope
There's
so.
a lot of us now.
There are a lot of us. You know, I don't know about you, but she encouraged me.
Absolutely.
And when I didn't.
encouraged you.
Oh yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, wow.
And I mean, I would write poetry because of, inspired by her, I think. But she would, oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah, that's right.
And it wasn't, but.
Oh, it was.
No,
I was there.
It wasn't. No, but I know. But Reeve has been a wonderful writer
She
since
made
I first
me.
knew her, which was when she was 8.
That's right. She would indeed. I mean, if you said something about a tree, or you talked, made some little babbling observation, she'd say, "Oh, I like that. Write that down. Write it down." So much. I mean, and my dear sister Anne, who's no longer with us, but wrote beautifully poetry and children's books and a lot. And she said, "Mother made me." And so, but she wasn't she didn't, beat us into writing. She just kind of loved us into it, I think. She was very, very, very full of praise and full of a sense of responsibility. She said, "Okay, now you have this observation and it's beautiful, write it down." And that was the job, that was the work. So I think Christina and I have both experienced that direct inspiration and nudge toward work.
But maybe the genetic part is that I know she said she could never fully think unless she had a pencil in her hand.
That's true.
And,
That's right.
And I think I have that gene, which is not very good thinking most of the time, like especially in places like this, if people are listening. But the pencil helps a lot. So maybe that's a certain sort of disability.
That's a good thing. That's a good thing. No, it isn't, and it can be a pen or who knows what. But
Or,
when
yeah,
you
the
start
keyboard.
writing it down, it's a big help.
It's a big help. Makes
Yep.
things, and you can also make sense of sad things or complicated things if you can write them down. So,
And she did.
and she did.
She did.
So much.
I think the pencil helps, and I come from a very different perspective, which is Wall Street, and the former head of Goldman Sachs and Secretary of the Treasury, Robert Rubin, wrote a recent book on risk management called The Yellow Pad. And he felt that it was critical to write his thoughts by hand. That's how he would analyze crises and next steps. And so I think that, mind-body connection is important. And I think mentorship, as you both said, is really critical in any career. I think the Explorers Club has a great program for young explorers, 50 under a certain âge. I can't remember what the topping off is, but clearly this was yet another incredible contribution that Anne made to the family. I think looking forward, we're kind of heading toward the end of the fireside chat. Anne's legacy lives in the family foundation. And I would be curious to hear a little bit more about what the foundation does. I think also I was told that it was founded here in the Explorers Club. Is that right?
Yes, it is.
By Neil Armstrong and
Jimmy Doolittle.
who was that? Oh, Jimmy Doolittle, incredible World War II pilot. I mean, talk about the right stuff. These two guys happened right here. And so 2 questions. Give us a little color on what the foundation does and how it's impacting,
I think I need Tom Lee. Tom, are you still here?
Here we go. Anybody else? Would you like to come up and say?
Please, thank you.
Yeah. You have the floor.
I do. Thank you so much. My name's Thomas Lee. I came in from Orange County, California, just for this event, and now I get to say a few words. So the Lindbergh Foundation that they were just talking about was founded here 48 years ago. It will be 50 years old in 2 years on the 100th anniversary of Charles' flight. And as you heard, Neil Armstrong and General Jimmy Doolittle wanted to honor the work that Anne and Charles had done to balance aviation or technology and the environment, and created the foundation to do that work. So I'll give you an example or two of the types of work that we have done historically. Aside from giving out about $3 million of grants, and Lindbergh Awards and Anne Morrow Lindbergh Awards and so forth. So we had a program called Air Shepherd that we started a few years ago. This was, we had invented or created some drones that would fly in Africa out of line of sight. It was the first certified drones that could fly out of line of sight over the herds at night with special sensors on them. And what we could do is detect when poachers were approaching the endangered elephants and rhinos and send that information down to the ground to the rangers who would interdict and prevent the poaching. And it really worked. It was a very effective program, and it continues today. We transferred over to another organization to manage it. We just moved our headquarters to St. Louis to come back sort of full circle. Charles had moved to St. Louis in 1923 to fly in an air show and loved it, stayed there, connected with the people, flew airmail routes from St. Louis up to Chicago. In fact, he flew the very first, we have a very famous female pilot here from American Airlines, who was the first commercial airline pilot for a major airline. And he flew the very first flight for American Airlines back in that time frame. So we're doing STEM education programs. I heard that mentioned here in St. Louis, for example. We have what's called the Epic STEM Challenge, and this is, we're working with the St. Louis Science Center in a program called Youth Exploring Science, and allowing these kids with about $20 worth of parts to build electric aircraft and learn the fundamentals of flight to inspire them to go into the field of aviation and so forth. And then the last thing I'll share with you, just to tease it a little bit, because I am chairing the planning for the 100th anniversary of Charles's flight in 1927, which will be coming up in just 2 years. What we're doing is we'd like to not only continue the great work that Charles and Anne had done, but some of the members of the board of directors of the Lindbergh Foundation helped found and create the X Prize Foundation, which some of you may know has done incredible work. The first prize was the Ansari X Prize, and that was for the first non-governmental aircraft that could be built to go 100 kilometers out into space, piloted, come down and land, and then do it again within 2 weeks. That was Spaceship One, which had been hanging right next to the Spirit of St. Louis at the Smithsonian. And so forth, which then became Virgin Galactic and so forth. So we're going to be working with the X Prize to create, they've done about 30 prizes in their 30-year history. They have about $600 million worth of prizes, which have either been awarded or in process today. We're hoping to develop an incredible, most impactful prize in history with them. And we might just be doing a recreation flight from New York, perhaps landing at the Paris Air Show, which takes place at Le Bourget Airport, where Charles landed in 1927, with some incredible people on board, and announcing this incredible, impactful prize. Because Charles was flying for a prize too, the Ortigue Prize in 1927. And so forth. So that's a lot of information. But anyway, the foundation does some really great work, and please look us up at lindberghfoundation.org. We'd love for you to get involved. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you so much. That was an added benefit to our presentation. I think I'm going to ask a final question and then introduce the first woman president of the club to wrap things up. But Reeve and Christina, and again, thank you, Dorothy, so much for all the detailed insights, the exhibits you curated. Any final insights, amusing, trivial, grand, otherwise, that you would like to share before we leave tonight?
I have one. I was reminded by my cousin Elynid Morgan of an astronaut, Rusty Schweikert, who flew in one of his missions with a shell, actually with a shell pin, and he knew he was going to be invited to one of the dinners of the Lindbergh Foundation, at which my mother was present, and he gave it to her, and she kept that beside her bed. I remembered vaguely, but I've sort of forgotten all about it. And then I have the pin. I have the pin. And I thought, oh, that's not it. It was something else. And then I realized it's right on my bureau. I'm sorry I didn't bring it. But she kept it next to her bed. And they got along very well. And the astronauts have always been extremely very, very kind and very respectful of my parents. And I remember them, I think it might have been Neil Armstrong, saying, we had a cast of thousands. He did it alone, basically. They were talking about the Spirit. But there was a great rapport between the early pilots and the astronaut family, all that. So.
There we go. I guess my thought on rereading this book was being so amazed that she recognized at the time of writing this that flight that's covered in North to the Orient was sort of at a tipping point between the old way of traveling by dog sled or little cars or trains, I guess, and suddenly they could get to these, with this flight, they could get to outposts that would take, the supply ships that came once a year to these settlements, it took them, 6 months to get there or something, and they could get there in 12 hours. But I think she felt also that there was an innocence lost with their flight, and that this speed that was taking over, life and they were kind of at the crux of that switch from the old way of life to this new way of life, which is just speeding out of control at this point, I think. But it was just a sort of amazing thought to me that they were right there and making this happen, and that we are the beneficiaries or the victims of it. So, yeah.
Dorothy, any final word from you?
Well, what you're saying there, I recall that she did write about that, and I think one of those, when they had flown in from Baker Lake or wherever to the next spot, and they witnessed one of these ships coming in, and the people who were acquiring these boxes that were being unloaded, one man opened one, and he said, "This is going to be my stove. I can't wait to see it." And then when he opened it, he said, "It's the wrong stove. We're going to have to wait a year now to get the right one." So, and they were very aware, I think, as they were going on, because they were enjoying the isolation away from the crowds, and now they realize that they are also maybe bringing in more people and change. And she was very good at describing and understanding what the cultures were like that they saw, but then she also realized that they were going to change inevitably, and they were a little ambivalent about that as well, because they loved what they saw, because they were the pioneers there first, but it wasn't going to last.
I think that everyone in this room, regardless of our age, has experienced that nostalgia for the way technology was. I remember as a very young woman flying actually to go to Europe, and you had to stop in Gander, Newfoundland, and then you had to stop in Shannon, Ireland. And very often the pilots would describe what they saw, what it was like to fly over the Rockies. And I think we have to both embrace that change and respect how it really informs our life today. This was extraordinary, a real privilege for Dorothy, Reeve, and Christina. And I am going to hand the mic to our illustrious President Emerita, an extraordinary explorer in her own right and highly accomplished businesswoman. Her resume would be too long, and it's too late in the evening. We all love and admire Fania. For closing the evening.
Good evening. Can you all hear me? Wow, what a wonderful evening we have enjoyed, paying tribute and celebrating the life of Anne Morrow Lindbergh. Now, you will all agree with me, to be the last speaker in an evening such as this has definitely disadvantages, because mostly everything that I plan to say has already been said. So what I am going to ask all of you to do is to pander to me, please, and have patience and allow me to repeat much what you have already heard. Anne Morrow Lindbergh, mother, wife, and very talented author. Her story has been inspirational and I feel privileged to make the closing remarks. Now, it is usual in such circumstances for the running order first for me to make the tribute and then to thank the people who made this evening possible. Now, many of them have already been thanked, but here goes. But I have made that decision because I want you to leave this room this evening with 6 words ringing in your ears, which, in my opinion, I believe describes Anne Morrow Lindbergh, aviator, pilot, and co-pilot, and her exploration. Ladies and gentlemen, just look at that photograph. Look at her shiny eyes and her big smile, and we'll come back to that later. But firstly, I want to thank the Lindbergh family, Eleanor, who masterminded the entire event from the get-go to this evening, Reeve and Christina, for sparing the time in your very busy lives to be with us. Thank you and welcome again. It's lovely to have you with us. Dorothy Cochrane, nobody can be more interesting with anecdotes and historical facts than you. Thank you, Dorothy. And our moderator, Bibi Conrad. Great job, Bibi. Thank you very much indeed. And finally, the amazing Explorers Club team. And to quote Lord Hunt, who led the original Everest expedition, without the team, it wouldn't have happened. So I want to thank Mulberry Poke and Sophia, Michelin, who did the planning, Felix Friedland and Margaret Ferris, who were involved with the programming, Louis Muger, who attended to the sound and technical items. Thank you all for making this excellent evening. Thank you. And also, thank you for your time and your good humor, because we were not very easy to work with. Excuse me. And now, before you leave, in my opinion, and Lindbergh family, I may be being provocative, but as I said, with her shiny eyes and her smile, she was a woman who loved to fly. So I would like, ladies and gentlemen, to ask you for a round of applause to celebrate Anne Morrow Lindbergh, a woman who loved to fly. And I wish you all safely home, and thank you for coming to the Explorer.